Jesus didn't come into this human incarnation to enforce a doctrine on us. Faith is more accurately measured by the courage of our questions than the certainty of our answers. So in Unity, we often describe Jesus as our master teacher, and we look to his wisdom as a guide about how we are each called to live this human journey. And yet, as we explore the Gospels, if we really start to look at them from a broad perspective, we discover that Jesus asks more questions than he answers. So, how many questions do you think Jesus asked in the Synoptic Gospels, in those four main Gospels? Take a guess. This is interactive. 20 questions? 3? 140. And you at home, you can make a guess too. Or just type it into the comment line. Anybody else? 97. They're getting some specific numbers here. Anybody else have a guess? Say again? 225. Well, you might be surprised to know that based on research that's been done, I didn't do it this past week, but I'm relying on others who have taken the time, it's somewhere between 300 and 350 questions that he asks in those four Gospels. And how many questions do you think he answered? He often did answer them with a question, but from the count of people who've done the research, there were 3 questions he answered directly out of all of the questions he was asked, which are more than 100 from those who have done the research. Why did Jesus ask so many questions? And why did he often answer questions with a question? I don't think it was because he needed more information. And after all, we believe and we know that he was one with the one, that he had a direct pipeline to that omniscient source out there. I believe that he understood the transformative power of inviting others to live into the questions rather than just simply focusing on the answers. We often, in our humanness, ask questions for information, and yet Jesus asked questions to provoke transformation. We ask questions for answers. Jesus asked questions to increase our awareness. We often will ask a question when we're trying to persuade someone to our point of view. Have you ever done that? You're asking a question because you know you've got the answer that's going to help them see the light of where they might be wrong. And yet, Jesus asks questions to confront the listener, to confront them with their own thoughts, with their own perceptions, with their own beliefs and assumptions. I found an article as I was doing research for this talk by a man named Mick Mooney, where he suggests that Jesus didn't come into this human incarnation to enforce a doctrine on us, to tell us what was what. He came into this life to invite us, to encourage us, to ask us to think and to question our perceptions and our beliefs about life, about faith, about God. Questions and faith are not opposed to each other. In fact, they're a perfect pair, he writes. In fact, faith is more accurately measured by the courage of our questions than the certainty of our answers. Think about that for a minute. Faith is more accurately measured by the courage of our questions, within our questions, rather than the certainty of our answers. Jesus' example invites us to get comfortable with living into the questions themselves, to be willing to hang out in that unknowing, which is, for most of us, really uncomfortable. I used to say, well, I'm just living in the question. And people are like, what? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what the answers are. I'm just hanging out here until they seem to arise, until I find the right next step. And oftentimes it's really uncomfortable for us because the ego loves this feeling of control and certainty that we get when we think that we have the answer. If we look at the types of questions that Jesus asked, he asked a lot of whats and a lot of whys. He asked open-ended question that it really invited his audience to go deeper and to explore and not just give a pat answer. He wasn't interested in questioning theological views or theories. He uses the questions that he asked to be able to connect with the people he's talking to express compassion for the people that he meets, to offer understanding, and to invite our own introspection. Jesus knew that when we are willing to pause and to contemplate and to struggle and to wrestle with those answers, we are far more likely to embrace the conclusions that we come to than if he had just stepped out and told us the answer is X, Y, Z. I wanted to look at a few of these this morning, one from Matthew 7. And you've probably heard this one before, but this is a little bit different version out of the Message Bible. It says, don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see the smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, let me wash your face for you, when your own face is distorted by contempt? In the other versions, it talks about a log in your eye when you're pointing out the speck in someone else's. Jesus invites us into the question of our own motives and our own ability to be compassionate with others. Can we be with people free of judgment and full of love? It's certainly an ideal we hold in this community, but we often have to ask ourselves and live into and have that introspection of, am I really stepping in and interacting in that way? For many, it's difficult to listen and to empathize with people who've made big mistakes, or sit with them in their anxiety without wanting to fix or to judge or to solve their problems. You know, I had a conversation with a friend earlier this week, and she had reached out because she was struggling with some of the things that were happening and on the opposite side, not happening in her church community, as a lot of churches are struggling right now of how do we move forward in this new way of being. Some cherished parts of the service had been deleted or changed, which really was hard for her heart to embrace. She was dismayed that there wasn't more in-person services or an effort and a desire to bring them back. They still have chosen to remain remote at this time, and that there was a real effort to limit the amount of activities that were going on. And she felt that her and others' opinions and suggestions were falling on deaf ears. While that conversation wasn't unusual, as many spiritual community, again, are grappling with those same questions, what caught my attention and what really enlivened my spirit as I was in this thought process about questions and the way that they show up and the way that they can really support us, is that as the conversation wound down, she said, but I want you to know that I every day check in with myself. I really examine where I'm coming from. I ask myself the question, is this around being resistant to change? Is my unhappiness and anxiety just part of my own dragging of my feet to want to change? She says, I ask myself, am I upset because I want to be right? Because I think that the way I see it is the right way to see it? Or does it have to be either or? Is there some way that it can be both and? One of my favorite ways to think about life. Are they seeing or knowing something that I'm not? So she said, I really wrestle with these questions every day. It's not just about my opinions and sharing them, but I'm really looking within and asking my own highest self for guidance around this. Her willingness and our willingness to be in the question brings us into greater alignment with our Christ wisdom. This is one of the things that I think Jesus wanted to know, is that there's this wisdom within, but you have to be willing to be in the question with it. Another interesting discourse that happens in the scriptures is when Jesus is sitting around at the end of the day with his disciples, and this is in Mark 8, and he starts by asking them an easy question. He says, who do people say that I am? Now, I don't think he was trying to go, tell me what's going on out there, what's the gossip about me, but he was wanting them to be willing to step into this place of questioning. And of course, each of the disciples kind of chimed in. They had an answer. Well, some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're a prophet. Some say you're Elijah. They each were willing to chime in. And then he looks at them, and I imagine with great love and compassion for each of them, who do you think I am? Now, we don't really get the picture painted for us, but I imagine that all of a sudden the disciples were sitting around looking at each other like, I don't, I'm not going to be the first one to answer that question. There's a desire to want to be right when we answer a question, that we want to know that we have the right answers. Until finally, Peter is the only one who steps up and says, you are the Messiah. And what follows is very interesting too, because this is how Spirit wants us to wrestle with this. Instead of saying, good answer, Peter, or you've got that right, Jesus launches into this grim description around what his journey is going to look like and the suffering ahead, until Peter finally goes, whoa, Jesus, stop. You're making us all really uncomfortable and nervous the way you're painting this picture of gloom and doom. And then the scripture goes on to say this, and he called to him the multitude. So he's calling now the greater crowd along with his disciples, and he says to them, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does a man profit to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? For what can a man give in return for his life? So he ends again with a number of questions for people to ponder. And so here's a question for you, and you can answer. It's okay to be wrong in unity, or just, I don't even know if there's a right or wrong. It's okay to have whatever opinion you have. But what is the cross that Jesus asks us to take up? Responsibility. Loving others as you would have them love you. What else? What's the cross that he says to take up the cross and follow me? What is that cross? It's not a physical two beams nailed together that he's talking about. A challenge, to take up a challenge and follow me. Transform, faith is what I'm seeing from out there. Forgiveness. I think those. Give up your individual person, your burdens. Give up your ego. I think those are all really good answers. As I thought about this, as I wrestled with it, for me, the answer is both simple and complicated all at the same time, which I think most truth is. And I see that cross as love. to take up the cross of love in all its forms: compassion, forgiveness, connection, joy, struggle, are all the forms that we can love one another. And it's not easy, because that is a path that the ego doesn't always feel safe and in control. That's a journey that we're called to let go of that part of us and live from the heart. Often Jesus would answer a question with a question. That was one of his more common ways of dealing with questions addressed to him. In Luke 10, we find a very familiar story, the one that's entitled The Good Samaritan. And it begins with a question by a holy person that's in the crowd around him, and that person asks, "What do I need to do to have eternal life?" And Jesus responds to his question, "What's written in the law?" with another question. And the man responds, "Love God and love your neighbor. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus in this case does say, "Good answer." And then he follows up with another question, and he says, and the man asked him then, "Well, who's my neighbor?" Because he wasn't sure he wanted to love everybody, but if he could define who his neighbor was, then that would help this journey to eternal life. And Jesus answers that question with a story. And it's the story we've heard if you've been in any kind of Christian church any time in your life, or even out there, you've often heard other people say it. And it's a story of a man who was robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. And two different men walk by and see this man laying there, one a priest and one a man of high ranking in the society, and both choose to walk on by and not get involved. And then we're told a Samaritan, who in that time was considered the lowliest of lowliness in the human race that was living there, not only encounters the man, he helps the man, he gets the man to safety, and he agrees to pay for whatever care is necessary to heal and to bring this man back to his whole self. And Jesus concludes this story by asking, "Now, who is this man's neighbor?" And the response of the person, much to his chagrin, is the one who showed him mercy. Jesus was aware that in that time there was a very strict class system, especially in the Jewish community. It was the law, in fact, that you did not interact beyond the community from which you were part of. And Jesus wanted the people of that time to awaken to the fact that in God's world, there are no classes. There are no divisions of people. I think it's still a valid question today. Who's my neighbor? To ask yourself of the ISIS organization, what would I do? Or pick any other thing that is difficult to reconcile with in our day-to-day life. Our invitation this week is to be willing to become more comfortable in the questions as a practice, as a way each and every day to expand and to open and to transform our awareness of God's light, of our own Christ nature. Jesus demonstrates the value, the awareness, and the transformation that comes from living in our questions rather than just seeking the answers. So that's our opportunity that we're going to take right now as we move into a time of meditation. We're going to allow this short time to be an inner space to ask our questions. I would invite you to wrestle with the question of who is my neighbor. But if there's another question that's been arising in your heart, then go ahead and allow that question to be what guides this time of inner reflection and quiet together. So I just invite you to get comfortable right where you are. Set aside anything you might be holding on to. Uncross your legs and let your feet be flat and grounded into the floor. Sit up straight and allow the chair that you're sitting in to support your back. And become focused on your breath as it naturally and easily moves in and out of your body. With each breath that moves in and through you, know that the very breath of God is also moving in and through you in this moment. And see if you can bring your attention down into your heart space. Maybe even imagining that that thinking part of you is slowly sinking down until it comes to gently rest in the area of your chest where the heart has its center. As you continue to breathe, almost imagine yourself breathing in and out of this heart space. In this sacred sanctuary, we are invited to wrestle with those big questions that life confronts us with and allow our Christ, our divine awareness to love and support us as we grapple with what arises through the questions. So ask a question now. Whether it's a further exploration of who I consider to be my neighbor, or something else that you've been wrestling with in life. And just be willing to sit in it and see what arises. We'll spend just a few moments in the silence so that you can listen with your inner ear. And as you slowly and gently begin to bring your awareness back to this time and space, aware of your body, aware of your breath, perhaps even wiggling your toes and fingers to be fully awake again in this earth suit that we get to embody during this spiritual journey. And know that the answers don't always come in a moment, sometimes not even in a lifetime. But it's when we are willing to be in the question that we awaken ourselves to transformation and to the fullness of God life, living and breathing and expressing through us. With one more deep breath, whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. I found a quote this week that I just loved, and I've heard it before, but it seemed appropriate for this time when we're in this questioning. And it's somehow the way I see my role. It came from a man named Dunn, who was a newspaper man in the early 1900s. And he said, "Our mission is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable." And oftentimes that is what being in the question is. And that's part of what I see my job is to really stir the pot so that we are always seeking to expand and to evolve and to move through the difficult questions of life. On our journey towards living into our Christ nature, part of that journey certainly calls us to live into the questions. And gratefully, we get to lean on and to support each other and our fellow spiritual travelers. So I found something else when I was out there, and I want us to hold this, think about this, ponder this, question this, as we move into our time of giving and receiving. And it says this: God is the giver, the receiver, and the gift, and is the sole owner of all of the intelligence, substance, energy, and opulence there is in the universe. If the children of God would learn to give for the joy of giving, whether it be love, money, service, or whatever it may be, they would open the door to such vast opulence that it would be impossible to want for a single thing in the outer expression. The unfortunate thing in humanity, which has caused such a rampant selfishness and unprecedented condemnation of each other, is the idea of claiming ownership to these wonderful blessings of God. For there is one love acting, one intelligence, one power and substance. So let's take that and let's just allow that to resonate in our hearts as we take these gifts. Who are watching with us live, you want to be in this fun too, I know you do, and you can go to centerofunity.org to our give page. You can give there, and then if you scroll down the page, there will be affirmations. There are little pictures. You just pick the one that resonates with you, and that will be an affirmation to bless you this week. So let us take these gifts into our hands and into our hearts and bless them together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am.
We all stand together and let's do our peace song.
Was meant to be with God as our Father, family all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. Every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me.
And let's go, knowing our prayer for protection. Together, the light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Have a beautiful week, everyone.